Most women think that sex after 60 is simply a memory, a faded photograph tucked away in the drawer of youth. Maybe you've even told yourself it's over. That passion is gone. That fire is for younger bodies, younger couples, younger lives. But what if I told you that's the biggest lie women our age have been sold? Because I've lived it. I have seen both ends of the spectrum. I lived loose in my past, chasing pleasure without love. And I have lived loved, in a marriage where intimacy has grown deeper and richer with the years. And let me tell you right now, loved wins, every single time. Now you might think that's easy for me to say, but listen carefully. If you had told me in my 20s that I would be enjoying sex more in my 60s, I would have laughed in your face. I would have said that's impossible. Everyone knows it fades. And yet here I am with a secret I wish someone had whispered to me decades ago. And I'm going to whisper it to you. But not yet. Because first you need to know this. Sex after 60 isn't a smaller version of what you once had. It's not a leftover. It's not a shadow. It's something entirely different. Something you can't even begin to imagine when you're young. And once you discover it, you'll never want to go back. So stay with me, because in the next few minutes, I'll show you why intimacy doesn't have to die with age. It can be reborn. And I'll reveal the first of the new rules that make it possible. It always amazes me how a woman my age can sit around the table with friends and talk openly about cholesterol numbers, about which statin they're on, about blood pressure pills, knee replacements, even bowel habits after surgery. But when the subject of sex comes up, suddenly every eye looks down at the floor. The very topic that should bring laughter, relief, and connection instead creates a wall of silence, and that silence is where desire goes to die. I know many of you have felt it in your own homes. You've lain in bed beside the man you've shared decades with, feeling the cool distance in the sheets between you. Maybe you've longed to reach for him, to brush your hand across his arm, to whisper what you really want, but you don't. The words catch in your throat. You roll over, pretending to sleep, and the silence deepens until it feels like a third person in the room. The tragedy is that the one person you should be able to talk to most easily about your body is often the one you speak to the least. And let's be honest, it's not only the silence between couples that kills intimacy, it's the silence in our doctors' offices. Too many physicians still treat sex after menopause as unworthy of discussion. Unless you're asking for a prescription, the conversation never begins. So women are left to quietly endure dryness, discomfort, loss of desire, or worse, feeling invisible. Even among friends, we'll talk about the newest medication, the latest grandchild, the holiday photos, but mention the word sex, and suddenly you're scandalous, as if desire is something you should have locked away with your high heels and miniskirts. And yet, here is the question I need you to face directly. Who told you that 60 was the cutoff? Who declared that at a certain birthday you should fold your body up, hide it, and pretend you no longer ache to be touched? Who decided that older women are meant to fade into invisibility, undesiring and undesired? Because I promise you this, that message did not come from your body, and it certainly did not come from truth. Intimacy doesn't disappear with age, it evolves, it deepens, but only if you refuse to let the silence keep its grip. Only if you dare to break the taboo and admit what you really want. You see, sex after 60 is not a leftover scrap of your youth. It is not a consolation prize. When approached in the right way, it becomes more honest, more liberating, and more powerful than anything you experienced in your 20s or 30s. And I want to take you there. But before I share the first of the new rules that allow passion to flourish later in life, you need to see something important. Because sex is not simply about mechanics or friction. It is not just about bodies moving together. There is something happening beneath the surface that most women never talk about, but once you understand it, everything changes. And that's exactly where we're going next. For far too long we've been taught to think of sex as nothing more than a physical act. Bodies colliding, motions repeated, a box to tick, or worse, a duty to fulfill. That is the shallow script most of us absorbed in our 20s and 30s, and it is the script that leaves so many women disillusioned by midlife. Because when the body changes, when energy shifts, when the familiar rhythms no longer work the way they used to, that shallow script falls apart. But here is what most women don't realize until later in life. Sex was never just about the physical. Desire is not born in the skin alone, it is born in the mind, in the memory, in the heart, and in the subtle chemistry of the body. When you kiss someone you love, when you let yourself be truly seen, when you give yourself permission to be vulnerable, you're not just exchanging touch, you're releasing oxytocin, reshaping your stress response, and creating new pathways of pleasure that ripple through your entire body. In other words, intimacy reaches places no pill, no lotion, and no performance trick ever could. And this is where sex after 60 becomes so extraordinary. The young believe that passion is all about stamina and spontaneity, about how long he lasts or how many times you climax. They think the fire is measured in friction, but with age comes a freedom to see sex as it truly is, not a race, not a performance, but a doorway into connection. You begin to notice the way a look across the table can be more electric than a kiss, how a hand on your back can undo you more than any acrobatics in the bedroom. You realize that the most powerful part of intimacy is not what your bodies do, but what they communicate. I see you, I choose you, I still want you. And when you understand that, something inside shifts. You stop measuring yourself against your 20-year-old body and start leaning into the intimacy only a 60-year-old woman can give. Because let me tell you, with age comes honesty. You no longer have patience for pretense, for silence, for faking it just to keep the peace. You crave depth, boldness, and truth. That is not a loss, that is an evolution. But here's the part I want you to hold on to, and this is why you must stay with me. When sex is treated as something purely physical, it withers with age. But when sex is embraced as a whole body, whole mind, whole heart experience, it actually grows stronger with time. And that growth requires something most of us were never taught. It requires unlearning the lies and discovering a different set of rules that are not about performance, but about intimacy. In just a moment, I'm going to share the first of those rules with you, and once you hear it, you will never look at the silence in your bedroom the same way again. Let's be honest with each other. Somewhere along the way, sex got stolen from us. It was taken out of the context of intimacy, stripped of its depth, and sold back to us as something shallow, performative, and ultimately disappointing. Just look around, magazines on the shelves, endless articles online, television dramas, all shouting the same message that sex is about performance, about novelty, about looking a certain way or keeping up with some impossible standard. And it isn't just women who are affected. Men, too, have been fed a script that intimacy is measured in conquest, in stamina, in being able to perform like they did in their 20s. The result? Women feel inadequate, men feel pressure, and couples end up chasing a fantasy that was never real in the first place. Then came pornography, promising shortcuts to pleasure, but delivering only distortion. It teaches the body to respond to screens instead of touch, to lust instead of love. And when women compare themselves to those images, or when men secretly bring those images into the marriage bed, intimacy collapses under the weight of comparison. Because intimacy cannot grow in a room filled with third parties, even imaginary ones. But this distortion is even subtler than that. Think of the language we use. We don't even say making love anymore. We call it sex. Cold, mechanical, a three-letter word stripped of meaning. When love is removed from the picture, what remains is a transaction, and women over 60 especially can feel the ache of that. Because by this age, we know in our bones that we were made for more than transactions. We long for communion, and here's the heartbreaking part. When intimacy becomes distorted in culture, it seeps into our private lives. We start to accept the idea that sex is only for the young, that it's about lust and novelty, and that once those fade, it's over. Women stop speaking up about what they want. Men stop trying to connect, silence grows, and marriages quietly settle into loneliness. But that distortion isn't the final word, not for you, and not for me, because the truth is still there, waiting to be reclaimed. And I want to tell you, when you strip away the lies, when you begin to rebuild intimacy from a place of honesty and connection, sex doesn't just survive age, it flourishes. And in just a moment, I'll reveal the first real new rule that makes this possible. But before we step into that, we need to confront one of the most dangerous myths of all, the myth that passion belongs only to the young. Because until we dismantle that, none of the other truths can take root. If you stop almost any couple on the street and ask them when sex is supposed to be at its best, they'll give you the same answer: when you're young. They'll say the 20s are the golden years, maybe the 30s if you're lucky, and after that it's a slow decline into routine, boredom, and eventually nothing at all. That's the story our culture keeps repeating. It's the reason you see older women disappearing from romantic movies, why commercials make jokes about grumpy old couples in twin beds, and why so many women quietly assume that their desires are a thing of the past. The myth says passion belongs to the young, lust belongs to the young, pleasure belongs to the young, and if you've passed that season, you should gracefully bow out. But let me ask you something honest. When you were in your 20s, was sex really everything you imagined it would be? Was it always fulfilling, always satisfying, always a beautiful connection, or was it often hurried, sometimes clumsy, wrapped in insecurity, comparison, and unspoken expectations? If we're being truthful, most of us would admit that youth doesn't automatically mean better intimacy. In fact, it often means confusion and sometimes even emptiness. Now compare that to what becomes possible in your 60s. By this age, you know yourself. You know your body, its strengths, and its vulnerabilities. You know what feels good, and more importantly, you know what kind of connection you want to build with your partner. You have the courage to say no to what doesn't serve you, and yes to what lights you up. And the kind of passion that comes from that place isn't weaker than youth, it's stronger, because it's rooted in truth instead of performance. Here's the secret no one told us. When we were younger, sex in your 60s can be deeper, bolder, and more freeing than it ever was in your 20s. But there's a catch. You can't play by the old rules. You can't cling to the same scripts that never really worked in the first place. To step into this new kind of intimacy, you must embrace the new rules, rules that allow you to adapt, to grow, to evolve into a more powerful connection than you thought possible. And in just a moment, I'm going to give you the very first of those rules. It's simple, but it changes everything. It's the doorway to breaking the silence, rekindling desire, and finally creating the intimacy that lasts. But before I tell you what it is, I want you to understand something vital about how desire really works. Because it isn't just about hormones or age, it's about appetite. And whether that appetite nourishes you or leaves you starving depends on what you choose to feed it. Think of your sexuality as an appetite. Just like hunger, it can be awakened too early, fed in the wrong way, or neglected until it withers. And just like hunger, it's not something you can simply switch off without consequences. Some women had their appetite stirred in ways that were rushed, pressured, or even painful. Some discovered desire through encounters that left them feeling more empty than full. Others spent decades treating sex like fast food, quick, convenient, but never nourishing. And then one day they wonder why their desire feels thin, weak, or absent. The truth is simple. What you feed your appetite with matters. When intimacy is fueled by lust alone, it burns hot and fast, but it leaves you starving afterward. Lust feeds the surface, not the soul. And when sex becomes only about performance, about looking a certain way, or keeping up with some imagined ideal, the appetite grows distorted. You can eat and eat, but you'll never feel satisfied, because what you're consuming doesn't meet the deeper need. But when intimacy is awakened slowly, carefully, in the right season, and then fed with love, with patience, with truth, something very different happens. Your appetite grows strong. It doesn't wither with age, it matures. Just like how a woman's taste for food evolves over the years, so does her taste for intimacy. The sugary rush of youthful lust no longer satisfies, but a richer, deeper connection can leave you feeling nourished for days. Here's the part most women over 60 need to hear. Your appetite is not gone. It may be asleep. It may have been fed with scraps. It may even have been confused or damaged along the way, but it is still there, and it can be reawakened, retrained, and healed. But you can't do it with silence. You can't do it by pretending, and you certainly can't do it by following the rules you were taught in your 20s. Which brings me to the first of the new rules. It's not glamorous. It's not about lingerie or tricks. It's about something much more powerful, something that has the ability to bring your appetite back to life in ways you never thought possible. And I'll tell you what that is, right after we open this first secret together. If there is one truth I wish every woman over 60 could write in her journal, it is this: silence is the enemy of intimacy. We were raised to believe that good women don't speak of sex, that a wife is supposed to quietly accept whatever her husband offers, or quietly endure what he doesn't, that expressing our own desires is either shameful or selfish, and after years, sometimes decades of silence, it becomes second nature. But let me tell you something, Silence doesn't protect your relationship, it strangles it. Desire cannot breathe in a room where no words are spoken. When you do not give voice to your needs, when you do not ask for what you crave, your partner is left to guess. And guesswork never builds intimacy, it builds distance. The first rule of intimacy after 60 is simple, but it will shake the ground you walk on. You must talk about it. Talk about what you like. Talk about what you miss. Talk about what you don't want anymore. And yes, talk about what you secretly long for but never dared to say out loud. Because the truth is, talking about sex is itself a form of intimacy. Every time you open your mouth to share something vulnerable, you are stepping into closeness before a single touch has happened. Now I know many women recoil at the thought. I wouldn't even know how to begin, they say, but here is where you start. You begin not with accusations, but with invitations. Not with "you never touch me," but with "I love when you hold me, and I'd like more of it." Not with "you don't want me anymore," but with "I miss the closeness we used to share." These little shifts turn a potential wound into a doorway. They turn what could be blame into what can be bonding. And do not underestimate the power of simply naming what is. If you feel nervous, say so. If you feel shy, admit it. If you don't know the right words, confess it. The courage to be honest is infinitely more attractive than pretending nothing is wrong. And once the words are spoken, you will be surprised at how often your partner has been waiting, just as uncertain, just as hungry, for the same conversation. This is why I call communication the first rule. Because until the silence is broken, nothing else can happen. No touch will feel safe, no gesture will feel complete if you are not speaking. But once you open your mouth, once you dare to say what has been buried, you give your intimacy permission to breathe again. And here's the beauty, this rule doesn't just apply in the bedroom. When you practice honest communication about intimacy, you'll find it spills into every corner of your relationship. You will laugh more, argue less, and see each other with new eyes, because words are not just words, they are bridges, and the first step to rebuilding desire is learning how to cross them together. Now, once the silence is broken, something unexpected begins to rise to the surface. For many women, it isn't just about what they say, it's about how they feel in their own skin when they finally try. And that's where the next danger shows up, one that quietly sabotages more intimacy than you might realize, the trap of body image. There is a question I want to ask you, and I want you to answer it honestly, not for me but for yourself. When you think of intimacy, what is the very first thing that makes you hesitate? For many women, the answer is not their partner. It is not even desire itself. The hesitation begins in the mirror. We are masters at criticizing our own bodies. We notice the stretch marks, the sagging skin, the softness around the middle. We compare ourselves to who we once were, or to impossible images on a screen, and then we wonder why our desire feels muted. It isn't that the appetite has gone, it's that shame has pulled up a chair at the table and started eating first. Here's the truth you need to hear from me, with absolute authority. Your body is not the enemy of intimacy, it is the gateway. And when you reject your own reflection, you close the very door that could lead you back to passion. Think about it. If you feel unattractive, how easy is it to pull away from touch? If you're convinced your partner is secretly judging you, how hard is it to relax, to surrender, to allow closeness? Shame is not sexy. Shame is suffocating. And the tragedy is this: most of the time, your partner does not see what you criticize. He does not see the scar, the softness, the line you obsess over. He sees the woman he has loved for decades, the one who bore children, who carried burdens, who has shared a life with him. And while you stand there picking yourself apart, he may be silently longing for you, wondering why you hide from him. But body image isn't just about looks. It's also about ownership. Too many women talk about their bodies as if they are betraying them. My hips ache, my skin is dry, my hormones are gone, as if their bodies are the enemy. But listen carefully. Your body has carried you to this moment. It has survived. It has adapted. It is still capable of giving and receiving pleasure, if only you will stop treating it as a burden and start treating it as an ally. So how do you begin to break free from the body image trap? You start small. You speak kindly to yourself in the mirror. You allow yourself to be seen without apology. You remind yourself that intimacy is not a photo shoot. It is a human connection. And you practice gratitude for the body that is still here, still breathing, still able to awaken. And here's the most liberating part. When you begin to see your body with new eyes, your partner begins to see you with new eyes as well. Confidence is magnetic. Acceptance is contagious. The more you embrace yourself, the more you open the doorway for intimacy to return. But what happens once you've started to speak, once you've begun to reclaim your body, and you're ready to step back into passion? That's when another question arises, a practical one that every woman eventually faces. How do you keep desire alive when spontaneity is no longer your reality? And that leads us straight into the next rule, one that feels controversial, one that many couples resist, but one that can transform intimacy after 60 more than almost anything else. There is a word that makes many couples over 60 cringe, and that word is scheduling. Somewhere deep inside, we've all been taught that intimacy should be spontaneous, that passion should strike like lightning, unexpected and irresistible. We imagine ourselves as teenagers again, pressed against a wall in a rush of heat, or as newlyweds who couldn't keep our hands off each other. And because we cling to that image, we quietly believe that if intimacy has to be planned, then it isn't real anymore. But let me ask you, how is that belief serving you now? If you are waiting for lightning to strike, how long have you been waiting? Weeks, months, years? For many couples, spontaneity is the very myth keeping them apart. Because at 60, life looks different. The body needs preparation. Energy dips at different times of day. Medications, hormones, even digestion affect how you feel in the evening. And so if you keep waiting for passion to just happen, you may be waiting forever. Here is the rule that changes everything. Desire does not die when it is scheduled. It grows. Planning intimacy is not clinical, it is sacred. Think of it like planning a holiday. You don't say, "We'll take a vacation if the mood strikes." No, you book the tickets, you set the dates, and as the day approaches, you feel the anticipation building. The same is true in the bedroom. When you know that Sunday afternoon or Wednesday evening belongs to the two of you, something begins to stir long before the first touch. You find yourself thinking about it, preparing for it, savoring the anticipation, and scheduling doesn't mean stripping away romance. In fact, it creates space for romance to return. Instead of waiting until both of you are too exhausted at night, you can choose a time when you're awake, present, and unhurried. Instead of letting intimacy become another forgotten item at the bottom of life's to-do list, you move it to the top, and that decision alone signals to your partner that they still matter, that closeness is still a priority. Some couples resist at first. They laugh nervously and say, "Oh, that feels awkward, too structured." But awkward is not the enemy. Indifference is. And once they try it, they often discover that what felt clinical at the start quickly becomes exciting. They look forward to it. They create little rituals around it, a favorite meal, a bath, soft music, a bottle of wine, and suddenly intimacy is not only restored, it is deepened. Now, scheduling desire does something else as well. It reveals a hidden truth. Intimacy is not only about the act itself, it is about everything that leads up to it. The anticipation, the small touches, the playfulness, the conversations. And when you start building this kind of rhythm into your relationship, you create a foundation for something even more powerful, because sometimes it isn't just about planning time together. It's about learning how to restart intimacy when it has been gone for so long that you don't even know how to begin again. And that's where we're headed next, into what I call the intimacy reset. There comes a moment in many marriages when intimacy hasn't just slowed down, it has stopped. Weeks become months, sometimes even years, and suddenly the thought of beginning again feels overwhelming. How do you break the silence? How do you climb over the wall of awkwardness that has built up between you? I've spoken with countless women who tell me the same story. They want closeness, they want to feel desired, but after so long they no longer know how to ask. They're afraid of rejection, afraid it will feel forced, afraid it's too late, and so they wait, and they hope, and the gap grows wider. But here is the truth, intimacy can be restarted. It does not matter if the pause has been months or years. Your body, your brain, and your relationship can be awakened again. And one of the most powerful tools for doing this is something therapists call the intimacy reset. It begins with the simplest of acts, touch without expectation. No performance, no goal, no pressure, just allowing yourselves to rediscover each other through small intentional moments of connection. Imagine sitting on the bed, fully clothed if you wish, and simply running your hand down your partner's arm. Imagine taking turns exploring how different kinds of touch feel, a gentle stroke, a firmer hold, the warmth of skin against skin, not rushing toward intercourse, not demanding an outcome, simply remembering that this body, This person is yours to know again. This is the brilliance of the reset. It removes the fear of failure. There is no not doing it right, because the point is not to perform, it is to reconnect. Couples who practice this often find that laughter returns, tension eases, curiosity is sparked, and slowly, almost without realizing it, the wall begins to crumble. And here's the secret I want you to hold on to. Sometimes the most healing form of intimacy is not wild passion, but gentle presence. Just lying side by side, touching without expectation, can awaken more desire than trying to force what no longer feels natural. It's like watering a dry garden. You don't flood it all at once, you begin with small streams, and before long the soil is ready to bloom again. Now, once intimacy has been restarted, many women are surprised by what surfaces next. They realize that the problem was never just lack of time or energy. There are other forces quietly poisoning desire. Forces we rarely talk about, but which steal passion little by little until nothing is left. And that's where we must go next, into the hidden bedroom killers that every woman needs to recognize before she can reclaim her intimacy. By the time most women reach their 60s, they don't need another candlelit dinner or another lecture about lingerie. What they need is the truth about the silent thieves that creep into the bedroom and steal intimacy piece by piece until there is nothing left but distance. I call them the bedroom killers. The first killer is neglect. Desire is like a flame, and flames don't go out suddenly. They dim slowly, as oxygen disappears. Every time you tell yourself not tonight, every time you push away touch, every time you avoid eye contact in the moment of vulnerability, a little more air leaves the fire, until one day you realize it isn't burning at all. The second killer is comparison. Whether it comes from glossy magazines, television, or the darker corners of the internet, the images we consume distort reality. When a man fills his imagination with pornography, his body begins to expect a performance his partner cannot and should not replicate. And when a woman consumes endless romance novels or media that portray intimacy as effortless and perfect, she sets herself up for disappointment. Intimacy cannot thrive in a room where fantasy is invited in to mock reality. The third killer is untreated change. After menopause, many women experience dryness, thinning tissue, or pain. Men often experience erectile difficulties or changes in stamina. These are not moral failings, they are biological shifts, but when ignored, they create shame, avoidance, and silence. Too many couples suffer in the dark when the solution may be as simple as medical support, the right lubricant, or a conversation with a doctor who actually understands. And then there is the most dangerous killer of all, silence itself, because silence allows all the others to grow stronger. When neglect is never named, it becomes normal. When comparison is never confessed, it becomes secret. When pain is never spoken, it becomes permanent. Silence does not protect your relationship, it smothers it. But here's the good news, every one of these killers can be defeated. Intimacy is not destroyed overnight, and it does not have to be restored overnight either. With the right practices, you can begin to push back. You can reclaim desire from neglect. You can replace comparison with connection. You can treat what is physical, heal what is emotional, and shatter the silence that has kept you apart. And there is one very simple, very practical rule that can help. One that sounds almost playful, yet it can reignite a spark faster than you think possible. It doesn't require acrobatics or hours of effort. It only requires a few minutes and a willingness to try. I call it the 5-minute rule. And when you understand how it works, you'll never again wonder how to take the first step toward desire. One of the most common complaints I hear from women over 60 is simple. By the time I'm in bed, I'm too tired. After a long day of errands, family, work, or even just the weight of aging itself, intimacy can feel like one more thing on a list that never ends, and so it gets postponed. Again and again, until weeks slip into months. But here's the secret most women don't realize. Intimacy doesn't need hours of preparation. It doesn't need to feel like a chore or a marathon. Sometimes it only takes 5 minutes. I call this the 5-minute rule. It's a playful pact you make with your partner. The rule is simple. If one of you is interested, the other agrees to give 5 minutes. Not 5 minutes of duty. Not 5 minutes of pretending. But 5 minutes of genuine openness to see if desire can be awakened. Because more often than not, the hardest part of intimacy is not the act itself, it's getting started. Think of it like exercise. How many times have you dreaded going for a walk or lifting weights, only to find that once you begin, you feel better than you expected? Intimacy works the same way. A kiss that lasts a little longer than usual, a caress, a playful word whispered in the dark. These are sparks, and 5 minutes of sparks can be enough to reignite a flame. And here's the beauty. Even if those 5 minutes don't lead to more, they still count, because touch without pressure still nourishes connection. Sometimes those 5 minutes become a tender embrace that eases you into sleep. Sometimes they grow into something more, and sometimes they are simply a reminder that you are still wanted, still chosen, still alive to one another. Couples who adopt the 5-minute rule often find that the fear of rejection disappears. No one is left wondering, will he be hurt if I say no, or will she roll away if I reach for her? Because the rule itself is an agreement. 5 minutes is always possible, and once the door is cracked open, desire is far more likely to walk in. But the 5-minute rule does something else as well. It shows you that intimacy doesn't have to be complicated, that even in your 60s, desire can begin with something small, something playful, something manageable, and from there it can grow stronger. Now there's something important we need to talk about, because for many women, the real obstacle isn't time, or even energy, it's the shadow of the past, the shame, the regrets, the moments of brokenness that still echo years later. And until those are faced, no rule, no ritual, no technique will ever feel complete. That's why the next part is perhaps the most personal of all. It's about what happens when your past keeps whispering in your ear, and how you can finally silence it. Every woman carries a history into the bedroom. Some of those histories are filled with love, joy, and safety, but many are not. I have sat with women who carry regrets like heavy stones, regrets about choices they made in youth, about affairs, about silence when they should have spoken, about encounters that were careless or unkind. I have also spoken with women who never chose at all, whose sexuality was awakened through trauma, coercion, or exposure to things they were too young to understand, and all of them ask the same haunting question: am I broken beyond repair? Here is the answer I want you to hear with absolute clarity. No, you are not. Desire can be healed. Intimacy can be redeemed. And your past, no matter how heavy it feels, does not have to define your future. Science tells us something remarkable. The brain is capable of change, even late in life. Old patterns can be rewritten. Memories that once triggered shame or fear can lose their power. And intimacy, when approached gently and with care, can literally rewire the way you experience pleasure and connection. That means you are not trapped in the story you once lived. You can write a new one. But redemption does not come through pretending the past didn't happen. It comes through choosing differently now. If you lived through years of promiscuity without fulfillment, you now have the chance to embrace intimacy rooted in love. If your sexuality was wounded by abuse or betrayal, you can create boundaries and rituals that honor your safety and bring your body back into trust. If shame has been your constant companion, you can begin speaking to yourself with kindness and allowing your partner to see you without judgment. I have watched women in their 60s and 70s step into the most satisfying intimacy of their lives, not because they erased the past, but because they refused to let it have the final word. They chose to build something new, and in doing so, they discovered that love was still waiting for them. And here's the part I want you to hold on to. Intimacy after 60 is not just about pleasure in the moment, it's about what you are building for the years ahead. Because every choice you make now, every touch, every word, every act of honesty is weaving something larger. It is weaving a legacy, and that is exactly where we go next. At this stage of life, intimacy is no longer just about tonight or even this year, it's about what you are building for the years that remain. I call it your sexual legacy. Think of it this way. Every couple leaves behind a pattern, a story that shapes how they see each other until their very last breath. Some couples build a legacy of avoidance, years of silence, years of sleeping back to back, years of quietly wishing for more but never daring to ask. Others build a legacy of lust, chasing novelty, feeding fantasies, mistaking intensity for intimacy until eventually the hunger burns out. But there are couples who choose differently. They build a legacy of intimacy, one where touch is tender, where words are honest, where every stage of life adds new layers of depth instead of stripping passion away. A legacy of intimacy means that when you look at each other in your 70s, you don't just see wrinkles or sagging skin, You see a partner whose body has carried decades of desire, whose eyes still hold a spark reserved only for you. It means you no longer fear the calendar. You no longer measure your worth against what you were at 20 or 30. Instead, you measure it against the closeness you've cultivated, the laughter you've shared, the trust you've deepened. And here is the beautiful irony. Couples who stop chasing youth often end up with more passion in their later years than they ever had at the start. Because when the pressure to perform is gone, when the fear of judgment is lifted, what remains is freedom. Freedom to explore slowly. Freedom to be honest. Freedom to rediscover what it means to be chosen again and again by the same person, year after year. Your sexual legacy is not just about what happens in the bedroom, it's about the atmosphere you create in your marriage. Do you celebrate each other's bodies or criticize them? Do you make time for intimacy or let it slip through the cracks? Do you let laughter and tenderness spill into your daily routines, or do you keep passion locked away for rare occasions? Every answer to those questions is a stitch in the fabric of your legacy. And here's the truth that should excite you: it's not too late. No matter what kind of legacy you have built so far, you can change it. Starting today, you can choose to stop feeding silence and start feeding connection. You can choose to stop seeing intimacy as something you used to have and start seeing it as something you are still creating. But there is one more piece, and it is the most important of all, because in the end, techniques and rules only take you so far. The deepest intimacy after 60 comes down to one final secret, a shift in the way you see each other that transforms everything else, and that is where we are going next. We have circled around truths and rules, we've peeled back the lies of culture, we've named the silence and even confronted the shadows of the past, but now we arrive at the heart of it, the one secret that binds all the others together, and it is this. Intimacy after 60 thrives when you learn to see each other not through the eyes of lust, but through the eyes of love. Lust is fleeting. Lust fixates on the body, on what is tight or toned, on what is new and novel. Lust always demands more youth, more beauty, more performance, and when lust is the measure, age feels like the enemy. Because no matter how hard you try, lust will always whisper that you are not enough. But love, real love, sees differently. Love looks at a body softened by time and sees devotion. Love looks at scars and stretch marks and sees the story of children carried, burdens borne, years survived together. Love looks past the calendar and says, "You are still mine, you are still wanted." And when intimacy flows from that vision, it does not fade with age, it flourishes. This is the final secret. It is not the position you try, or the hours you spend, or the tricks you think you must learn. It is the way you choose to see each other. When you allow love to color your eyes, your partner becomes not an aging body, but a soul intertwined with your own. And in that place, passion awakens naturally. Desire grows deeper, not shallower. And intimacy becomes not just something you do, but something you are building together, day after day. Let me say it clearly. Intimacy after 60 is not a shadow of what you once had. It is a new creation, stronger than youth, because it is rooted in truth. It is not about keeping up with the past. It is about writing a new story for the future. So here is my challenge to you. Do not settle for silence. Do not bow to comparison. Do not believe the myth that passion belongs only to the young. Instead, choose today to see yourself and your partner through eyes of love. Begin again, even if it feels awkward. Reach across the sheets. Start the 5 minutes. Plan the time. Speak the words. And build the legacy you want to leave behind. Because intimacy after 60 is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of a chapter you were never told was possible. And once you step into it, you will never again believe the lie that sex dies with age. If this spoke to you, share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment below. I want to hear your voice, your questions, your story. And subscribe to the Female Health Podcast so you don't miss the next conversation we'll share together. Because this community is proof that women do not fade with time, we rise.